how is this crisis impacting on young people in particular?
I think there's a number of ways of kind of looking at that. One is, I think there's a shared experience that we all have of COVID-19. And a useful way to think about that is that it is a shared trauma. We may not always feel that this is a trauma at any one time, but it is a traumatic experience. And for some of the young people that LEAP works with, this is a trauma which is laid on top of other traumas in their lives, adverse experiences. And young people are reacting in very different ways to that. Sometimes people have developed a lot of resilience and are coping well. And sometimes by adding trauma onto trauma, young people are facing really big challenges now. I think what we find is that if you help young people to explore and think about how they're responding in a particular situation, that in itself can be very helpful. So to give you one example of that, we've developed some new training, actually using Zoom, to help people to think about what their responses are. And just one example of that would be, faced by trauma, we tend to either fight or flight or freeze is kind of one of the models that we use. So if our response, whatever our age is, to drink more, then that's a flight response. If it's to sit on the sofa thinking, I know I should be doing exercise, I know I should be doing my long to-do list, but I just kind of, I just can't deal with that stuff, then that's a freeze kind of response. And if it's to get really irritated with the people that we're sharing a flat with, then that's a fight response. So if you can help people to sort of think about this in this shared kind of trauma way. What I think is particularly worrying is what is also coming down the line for young people. It's been difficult for many young people in recent years in terms of things like student debt, in terms of difficult job markets, in terms of housing prices. And for a group of young people that LEAP work with, life has often been very hard. So if you're a young person growing up in foster care, or if you're a young person who's been excluded from school or struggling to find work, or locked up in some part of the secure estate, that's a really difficult kind of thing. And what is frightening about what we see in terms of the analysis of how this is hitting is that it is hitting young people disproportionately. It's also hitting women disproportionately. So you're 2.5 times more likely to work in a lockdown industry if you're under 25. So 30% of under 25s work in a lockdown industry. So it's those kind of bits of the working world where almost no activity is happening. So the people who work on aeroplanes, the people who work in hospitality, who work in catering, disproportionately. 30% of under 25s compared to only 13% of over 25s. We're also seeing that there's a big disproportionate impact in terms of Black and Asian minority communities, disproportionately affected, and inner city areas as well. Reports out today showing that if you live in an inner city area, you're more likely to be directly affected by this. So I think there's the short-term impact of young people losing their freedom, disruptions to their working world and disruptions to education, but a real fear that in that medium term, we'll see a big rise in youth unemployment with the associated social problems that come with that. It was interesting to hear the Prime Minister saying that, the solution going forward is not going to be austerity. And my hope is that the needs of young people and the fantastic young people who can help to shape what that response is going forward. Otherwise, there will be a generation who's largely lost from the world of work going forward.
So if the Prime Minister was to invite you in for a heart-to-heart and sort of say, Ben, when this is all over, what can we put in place for young people? What would you advise him to do?
I think there's probably there's a few elements to that. One is being really careful in terms of the pace at which the furlough scheme is taken away, because there are a huge and disproportionate number of young people whose livelihoods is being maintained through that. Secondly, I think there will be new opportunities in the new world. So there are some employers that are taking on new workers, making sure that young people have got great information around where the new opportunities are. So that's really good careers advice. There are entrepreneurial young people, and they need support and encouragement and skills and capital to help take their ideas, because if there's less employment, we need to create more self-employment opportunities. But I think the other thing is there needs to be a real recognition of the collective trauma that people have been through. And if for some people who are less resilient and haven't been supported through that trauma in the past, who've had difficult things happening in their childhood, making sure that there are the services in place and making sure that young people are designing those services and helping to shape what those services look like. And part of that is around making sure that the mental health support services are in place, and that's given a real kind of priority going forward too. I think the other thing is understanding that in one sense, anybody can get COVID, and in one sense it is a shared experience, but in another sense there are certain communities who are very disproportionately affected in terms of the economic impact, and that tsunami of unemployment which I fear is coming down the tracks.